Commissioner O'Donnell, can you hear us?
Yes, sir. I'm right here.
All right, thank you.
I am.
Morning. Time is now 9 a.m. We are on day 2. We'll go back on the record. We are now on day 2 of docket number 2019.10.076. Today's date is February 28th. We're in the Bollinger Room here at the Montana Public Service Commission. I would note for the record that Commissioner O'Donnell is participating virtually, and the remainder of the commission is present in the Bollinger Room. Where we had left off yesterday was that we had introduced into the record the direct testimony and the rebuttal testimony of Mr. Schiffman. And Mr. Uda, you have your case in chief, so please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I call to the stand Roger Schiffman.
Good morning, Mr. Schiffman. I believe you were in the room yesterday when we did the mass swearing, correct?
I was, Mr. President, yes.
All right, Mr. Schiffman, thank you. Mr. Uda, your witness.
Chairman, at this point, I would make Mr. Schiffman available for cross-examination.
All right, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Mr. Schiffman.
Good morning.
Sarah Norcott representing you again.
You as well.
So would you agree with me that we're here today because the Montana Supreme Court found that the commission needed to determine how much CED should have to pay for the interconnected operations of the week?
That's one of the issues, yes.
You present an allocation proposal, do you not?
Yes.
And what is your recommended denominator in that allocation proposal?
I think the commission could use either 500 megawatts or 480 megawatt in the rated capacity or MVA capacity of the line.
Okay, in your testimony, do you not suggest that the commission should use the determination or megawatts?
Well, Northwestern hasn't provided emergency ratings for its line, so we don't have an emergency rating for that line in particular.
Okay, so when I look at your testimony, so are you looking at your direct testimony, page 15, table 6?
Yes.
Okay. So in that table, do you not present line ratings for emergency rating conditions under either the power flow or the WEC average emergency rating?
I do present these. These are summary statistics just of the lines that are in the WEC base case.
Okay, and so do I understand your testimony today that you are not proposing those as the denominator for your allocation methodology?
No, I think the MVA rating would be a reasonable choice for the commission to make. And then in addition to the summary data, then the powerful modeling I did as well confirmed that the 500 megawatt transfer could occur.
You turn to page 16 of your testimony. I apologize, there's not line numbers in your testimony, but at the top paragraph right before refund of or reimbursement of network upgrades, there's a sentence that reads, for that reason, the ratings of the new 230 kV line segment used in the proportionality analysis should reflect emergency ratings as outlined above in table 6. Is that what your testimony reads?
It is, and then this testimony was supplemented by the powerful modeling that I didn't do until I submitted rebuttal testimony.
Okay, so we can ignore that statement from you and focus on the 478 or the 500?
I believe it's reasonable for the commission to use those two numbers. They could use these numbers if they find this persuasive. My main point on emergency ratings is that I believe they should be used in the power flow modeling. But again, we don't have those data because Northwestern hasn't developed emergency ratings.
So under your rebuttal analysis, you have taken Northwestern's power flow models, correct?
Yes, one of the powerful cases I received from Northwestern, yes.
And then you made some changes to that power flow analysis, correct?
I made the changes exactly as described in my testimony, no other changes.
Right, but you made changes to that power flow analysis.
I made changes to reflect additional injections in the Wheatland and Judith Gap area and then to offset those additional injections with reductions in injections at Colstrip, yes,
And you did that because you needed the system to balance, correct?
that's correct.
Okay. So it's fair to say that you manipulated the data in order to balance your power flow studies.
I didn't manipulate the data. When you make a change in the power flow, you need to keep the load and the generation injections in balance. So I made an offsetting adjustment to the power flow data to make sure that the system stayed in balance. If you don't do that, then the power flow model will automatically make that offsetting adjustment at the slack bus or the swing bus.
You would agree with me that Northwestern also made changes in order to balance its power flow,
I wouldn't agree with that, no.
really?
From my reading of the Northwestern data is they made changes to generation dispatch and injection values for the power flow modeling itself, but it appears that the adjustments for the incremental capacity at injections at Wheatland were basically left to the change in the swing bus.
So do you believe that Northwestern can inject, let me back up. If this new partial transmission 230 kV transmission line is built, do you believe that Northwestern can inject more than 90 megawatts of electricity onto that transmission line?
Yes,
Have you reviewed Northwestern's interconnection queue for projects that are interconnecting in the Wheatland area that are also requiring this new transmission line?
I've reviewed some of those studies, not all of them, I think.
Are you familiar with Project 420?
I am now. I think there was a data request about it and I hadn't reviewed it at that time, but I reviewed it subsequently, yes.
Mr. Chairman, may I approach?
No objection.
Mr. Schiffman, can you identify what I've just handed you?
It's a large generation system impact study for project number 420.
And have you reviewed this report?
I have reviewed it, yes.
Mr. Chairman, for the commission's benefit, this is already in the evidentiary record. The commission took administrative. Can you turn to page 3 of this report, please?
Yes.
Can you read the description of this project?
The interconnection customer has proposed interconnecting a 200 megawatt solar facility to a new point along the Broadview to Judith Gap South 230 kV line. The interconnection request is for a total output of 200 megawatts at the point of interconnection. The project number is 420 in NWE's interconnection queue. The requested commercial operation date, COD, is January 1, 2024. The interconnection customer has requested that the study consider ERIS and NRIS service.
Thank you. Can you turn to page 8? On this page, under the heading discussion, can you please read the first bullet under contingent facilities?
Says new P351 POI Broadview 230 kV line, approximately 45 miles triggered by project 351.
Okay, do you know what P351 or project 351 is?
Yes, that's the Wheatland project.
So do you agree with me that for project 420, the new transmission line that has been identified for Wheatland is also identified as a contingent facility?
That's what Northwestern has identified, yes, in addition to other contingent facilities.
So you would agree with me that for project 420, which we've established is a 200 megawatt solar project that needs the same transmission as the Wheatland project, needs additional network upgrades for which it is responsible for already over $41 million.
That's what this report concludes, yes.
So is it fair to say that this project that is behind Wheatland in the interconnection queue, in order to interconnect on this new transmission line, needs substantial network upgrades in order for its interconnected operations?
I mean, I've not done a review of that study, so I can say that this report makes that conclusion. I can't say I make that conclusion.
But this report makes that conclusion.
Yes.
Correct. Do you believe that the new transmission line that needs to be built for the Wheatland interconnection very clearly and obviously provides system-wide benefits for the entire system? Is that correct?
Yes,
Despite it being so obvious, though, you can't quantify those benefits, correct?
well, you could say the power flow modeling I did quantifies that it creates additional transfer capability of 500 megawatts, so that would be a benefit.
Did you not answer a data request that said you could not quantify?
If you could point me to that, I'll be happy to review it.
Answer data request NWER12C. Do you recall answering that?
Then council will let me review it.
Chairman, may my
Sure.
associate approach?
Yes, of course.
I apologize. It's NWER21.
I have the data response. Could you repeat the question again, please?
So despite it being so clear and obvious that there are system-wide benefits, you cannot quantify those benefits, correct?
Ask me about NWERO 21C, is that correct?
Just, just NWER 21, the entire data request that asks about quantifying alleged reliability and alleged economic benefits, correct, in B and C?
Yes, that's true. It asks about reliability and economic benefits. In response we gave, you said, please quantify the alleged, starting with B, for example. In the response to A, we gave a general description of benefits. In response to B, we said, I haven't completed a quantification of alleged reliability benefits. Similar response to alleged economic benefits. My reading of this question, if you were quantifying reliability benefits, you could say that an increased transfer capability increases reliability, but you can't say by how much. How does it change the probability of an outage? How does it change loss of load probability? So we did not do that sort of a quantification. Similarly, for economic benefits, you could run a nodal production cost model and say, how much does the improved reliability you're getting from this line improve production costs and create an economic benefit for the ratepayers? We did not do that. So that was our response here.
But you do claim that this new line will have system-wide benefits, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So you believe, sitting here today, you're going to tell this commission that this new line in Wheatland County will benefit customers in Missoula or Dubois, Montana?
I'm not picking a location. I'm saying it provides additional transfer capability beyond 75 megawatts to Northwestern system. It creates an additional element that they can rely on to transfer energy. It creates an additional element that they can rely on if, for example, their contingency happens and they lose the existing 230 kV circuit. So that definitely provides a reliability benefit to the Northwestern power system.
So under what conditions does your power flow model procedures produce over the 500 of transfer capability?
Under what conditions?
Yes.
I mean, I listed in my testimony which case I used, and basically under the conditions that are specified in that case by Northwestern, with the only exception being, again, that I increased the injections at Wheatland and at Judith Gap and reduced the injections at Colstrip.
So was that under normal conditions or contingency?
My understanding is it's under contingency conditions.
But you believe it should be conducted under normal conditions, correct?
That's how I believe the study should be done, but I decided to not alter Northwestern's power flow other than the items I just described. So we didn't have to sit here and fight about, what changes did I make?
But you did make changes, correct?
The changes that I've described several times, yes.
And you also, let's talk about the wind output. You don't believe that it's proper to study wind at 100%, correct?
I believe it's proper to study Wheatland at 100%, but not the other or adjacent wind generators. But again, I did not make that change in the modeling I did.
Do you agree with me that there's a difference between study work that's related to transmission, study work that's related to the interconnection process?
There are some differences, yes.
Have you ever been to central Montana where Wheatland's built?
I've been through central Montana. I don't know that I can bring, it's been years ago, so I don't recall if I was exactly in that location.
Are you familiar, though, that this area is a gold mine or a prime area for wind generation?
Yes.
Do you think it's possible for a wind generating facility like Wheatland to be generating at full output while other generating facilities in that area are also generating at full output?
I don't know if it's possible. I haven't really reviewed production profiles. In general, when you look at wind resources across a geographic area, there's diversity just because of different wind patterns and geography, so that it's unlikely that everything is operating in exactly the same way at the same time.
But if two wind generators or wind farms were close to each other, they could both be operating at full output, correct?
Conceptually, if they're close to each other, but we're not talking about just two generators in the power plant. We're talking about all of the wind generators across the entire state.
And you said you have not reviewed any data to support that concept of correlation?
I have not reviewed hourly wind profiles in that region, no.
Have you reviewed the third-party non-binding mediation?
I reviewed it just briefly after.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to continue, note my continuing objection to this line of questioning.
Mr. Chairman, I didn't know there was an objection to this line of questioning, so yes, I asked him about the.
Right, and that's what I objected to because it's not in the record.
All right, thank you for specifying your objection. Please proceed.
Have you reviewed that third-party non-binding mediation?
I had not reviewed it prior to this case. I reviewed it briefly subsequent to Northwestern asking us a discovery question about it.
Have you not relied on this report in your testimony?
No,
You have not.
I've not cited this report in my testimony, no.
Mr. Chairman, if you just give me a minute. So, Mr. Schiffman, it's your position that you have not relied on this report.
I did not rely on this report. I recall yesterday you made a statement that I cited it in my testimony, and I reviewed my testimony because I found that statement surprising. And I could not find a reference to that. There's some issues in that report about Northwestern's power flow modeling that I do talk about, but those are issues that I have with the power flow modeling. It's not because of that report.
So do I understand you have issues with Northwestern's power flow modeling notwithstanding that report?
Yeah, my issues have nothing to do with that report.
But you have reviewed the report.
Again, I reviewed it briefly after Northwestern asked us about it because I hadn't reviewed it previously. I was involved with some power flow modeling for the original Wheatland study prior to that arbitration proceeding starting. And I had provided to Mr. Laukhart, it's Lauckhart, the power flow data sets because those were requested by the arbitrator, but that was the extent of my involvement in that proceeding or in that dispute.
Mr. Chairman, may I approach?
You may.
Mr. Schiffman, can you identify what was just handed to you?
It's a report apparently authored by Angel Artifacts, ARTIFEX Energy Solutions LLC, and it's entitled Wheatland Wind Plant Generation Interconnection Q number 351, Non-Binding Dispute Resolution Decision. It's dated April 23rd, 2021.
Is this the report that you reviewed?
I believe so, yes.
Can you turn to page 15 of that report, please?
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to lodge my continuing objection to asking questions about this report, which is not in the record.
Council, do you have a response? For what purpose is this report being used at this point?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm using it to impeach his prior statement about correlation.
Thank you.
Are you on page 15?
I am, yes.
Do you see at the bottom there, table 9?
Yes.
Do you see that it talks about 2 wind facilities, South Peak and Spion Cop Wind?
That's what's in the title of the table, yes.
And looking at figure 3, that's also on page 15, would you agree that South Peak and Spion Cop are very close to each other in location?
Yes.
Would you agree with me that the data here supports that there were over 800 hours over a 10-month period when these 2 facilities were generating at 90% or more of their output?
That's what this table shows. It doesn't show what the time period of that is. Was it coincident with Northwestern's peak, which is when you study the power flow? It doesn't show anything for, all of the other wind generators beyond those 2 that are right next to each other.
But this data supports that there can be 2 generating facilities that are both near capacity at the same time as far as their output.
I mean, I've not reviewed the data that underlies this. The report implies that for 800 hours that I don't know if this is a projection or if these are actuals. So it has some implication of that, but again, it doesn't address the time period of that, and it doesn't address other wind generators, all of which Northwestern is modeling at 100% in its studies.
Looking at figure 3, you see the Wheatland project identified.
Yes,
You would agree that there's wind facilities close to the Wheatland project?
there are wind projects in the vicinity. Yes, they're quite a distance from South Peak and Spion Cop.
Correct, but there's other wind facilities that are close to Wheatland.
Yes,
You would agree with me that this report finds that the local area wind plant generation is correlated.
this report states that the modeling of the wind is consistent with the LGIP, which, as Ms. Mueller had talked yesterday, are large generator interconnection procedures. I don't know that it necessarily concludes that they're all correlated. It's just saying that whatever is being done here for the modeling fits within those procedures.
Mr. Shipman, my question was, does this report conclude that the local area wind generation output is correlated?
It has a statement to that effect.
Do you think it would be prudent for Northwestern to understand the potential consequences if multiple wind generating facilities are interconnected in the same windy area and operating at full output?
Sure.
Do you believe that a QF should be able to unreliably interconnect a generating facility to the detriment of Northwestern's customers?
I don't think I've ever stated anything of that effect.
Let's turn to the discussion of refunds. It's your position that CED projects should receive a full refund of all network upgrade costs that they pay to Northwestern, correct?
That's what I believe to be consistent with FERC requirements and to be non-discriminatory, yes.
So under your proposal, is it correct that CED would pay nothing for network upgrades?
No, they would fund the network upgrades in advance and they would carry that financing cost and then they would get refunded when and if they achieve commercial operation.
They won't pay though for any of the network upgrade facilities that Northwestern customers will ultimately pay for under your proposal.
They'll pay for the financing during construction, but then they'll get refunded the initial funds that they incur.
So they will not pay for those facilities, correct?
I think I just
Question
answered the
asked and
question.
answered.
Mr.
I'm just going to overrule. Please proceed.
I'm sorry, Mr. President, you said overrule?
Yes, please answer.
As I just stated, they will pay for the financing costs during construction and then they will get refunded for the upfront monies.
So again, they will not pay for the facilities that Northwestern has to. construct.
Objection asked and answered.
I'm going to sustain it this time. Maybe rephrase.
Northwestern has to build a new transmission line, correct?
That's what Northwestern has concluded, yes.
If Wheatland receives a refund, will it pay for that transmission line?
It will pay for it initially. It will carry those financing costs and then it will get refunded.
So that transmission line is,
So its net cost will be the financing cost, if that's your question.
I'm not asking about the financing costs. I'm asking about the cost to actually construct those facilities. The approximately, it's $76 million that's identified in Ms. Muller's testimony. Will Wheatland pay that $76 million?
I'm sorry, I'm not trying to be difficult. I just don't know how to answer the question differently. They will pay it initially. They will carry the financing cost, then they will get refunded. So they will have a net cost, which is equal to the financing cost.
We'll move on. Would you agree with me that the Montana Supreme Court has said that Wheatland is responsible for a portion of the network upgrade costs?
I don't actually
Object,
recall
Mr.
exact
Chairman, that
language.
mischaracterizes the Supreme Court's opinion.
I don't know how to respond. I disagree. I mean, I can put the report and hand out a copy of it, but
I don't think it's necessary. This witness is not a legal expert.
So I appreciate both council's arguments. So here's my response. One of the curiosities of Montana Public Service Commission proceedings is that we often have witnesses opine on the law and give their opinions on the same. Certainly that I read this witness's testimony and I find it replete with legal conclusions. So, and that would be true also of Northwestern Energy's witnesses. So I'm not inclined to sustain an objection on legal conclusions at this point, plus the inherent danger, of course, involved with presenting legal conclusions to a jury is not involved here. We are the commission. We will ultimately make the determinations of law. So I'm going to overrule your objection, Mr. Uda. Now, as to your earlier objection, so I'll take them one at a time here. Council, do you have a copy of the Montana Supreme Court decision? Perhaps you should present that to them and then question him based on the actual content of the decision. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I would request that she give Mr. Schiffman time to review the opinion.
Sure. Time is now 9:34 a.m. Why don't we take a 5-minute recess to give Mr. Schiffman time to read Montana Supreme Court opinion? We'll go off the record. We'll convene 9:40 a.m. All right, Commissioner O'Donnell, are you still on?
Yes, sir.
All right, thank you. Okay. Are we ready to proceed? 9:40, time is now 9:40 a.m. We will go back on the record. Where we left off was Mr. Schifflin was presented with a copy of the Montana Supreme Court's decision in CED Wheatland Wind versus the Montana Public Service Commission. Have you had time to review that decision, Mr. Schifflin?
I've reviewed it, some sections of it. Yes, Mr. President.
All right. Are we ready to proceed then?
Yes,
All right, please move forward.
thank you. Mr. Schiffman, can you turn to page 9 and look at paragraph 31?
Yes,
Towards the end of that paragraph, does it read CED does not dispute its responsibility for some costs, only that it's unreasonable to pay the entire 267 million?
that's not the entire paragraph, but that is what that sentence says. Yes.
Okay, so you agree with me that sentence is there, that CED does not dispute its responsibility for some costs?
That is what that sentence reads. Yes.
And it's your position here today, though, that CED should not have to pay any of the network upgrade costs associated with the new transmission line.
As I stated earlier, they would pay initially, they would bear the financing cost, then they would get refunded. That's my position.
Right, so they pay $0 for the network upgrades, correct?
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to object because this is just a rehash of the prior arguments over whether she's asked and answered this question. She's just asking and answering the same question repeatedly.
So Miss,
Go ahead, counsel.
you know what, I will move on. I think it's clear that what CED is asking for is zero.
And now
Payment.
counsel is testifying, and I would object and ask that to be stricken from the record.
All right, everybody stop. So I'm going to sustain Mr. Uda's objection. I agree with Mr. Uda that you were commenting on the testimony, so I will sustain the objection of striking counsel's commentary on the testimony. Please proceed.
I think that is all I have, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, counsel. Mr. Brown.
Morning, no questions. Thank you.
Mr. Brown, you're always short and to the point. Vice President Fielder.
No questions at this time, Mr. President.
All right, Commissioner O'Donnell.
Thank you. Taking my lead from the Montana Consumer Council, no questions, Mr. President.
All right, Commissioner O'Donnell, Commissioner Pinochi.
No questions, Mr. President.
Thank you. Commissioner Bukacek.
No questions.
All right. Well, Mr. Schiffman, I do have a series of questions for you, so we'll spend some time together.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Well, good morning, Mr. Schiffman. Thank you for your testimony this morning. You were here during yesterday's testimony, namely the testimony of Mr. Pankratz, correct?
I was, yes.
And you had opportunity to listen to that?
Yes.
Okay. Do you recall Mr. Pankratz's testimony where he provided definitions of the N-1 and N-1 and N-2 contingency conditions?
Yes.
Do you agree with the explanation that was provided by Mr. Pankratz of those conditions?
Of what they are and the definitions? Yes.
Yes. Okay. All right. Would you turn to page 4 of your rebuttal testimony?
Yes, I'm there.
You would agree with me that you testify on page 4 of your rebuttal testimony regarding the investment to achieve 90 megawatts of incremental capacity, correct?
Yes,
Okay. And your testimony is that investing more than 80 million to achieve 90 megawatts of incremental capacity is not cost effective, correct?
yes, that's correct.
And you also testified that a lower voltage solution would likely be adequate to deliver Wheatland's 75 megawatts of capacity, correct?
Yes,
So this is an accurate summary of your testimony?
it is, yes.
Okay. All right, then, if you believe Northwestern Energy's proposed network upgrades are not cost effective, what is CED's alternative proposal, if any?
Well, CED doesn't really have an alternative proposal. I think even under the procedures, they're not really. Subsequent to the arbitration report, they decided to not file a complaint at FERC, and so that dropped it. So essentially, in terms of as I understand it, the technical solution, they're accepting the 230 kV line upgrade.
Okay. So you've not suggested, CED has not suggested a lower voltage solution.
No,
Do you have an opinion or idea of what the lowest voltage line that Northwestern Energy could install to move CED Wheatland's energy to the Broadview substation?
well, again, just based on, say, an MVA rating, in radial operations, probably a 69 kV or a 100 kV would be more than adequate to carry that 75 megawatts.
Okay. But it's my understanding from your testimony that you're not suggesting Northwestern and you or your client should, you're not requesting that Northwestern Energy should construct a line that is tailored solely to the Wheatland facility, correct?
I'm not, I'm expressing an opinion here that, I think that a lower voltage alternative could suffice, but we're not technically challenging the interconnection upgrade as part of this proceeding. I don't think that's the scope of this proceeding.
Again, you recall Mr. Pankratz testifying about the Grand Coulee facility.
Yes,
So as I recall, Mr. Pankratz testified that the adjustment of Grand Coulee and the power flow analysis would not impact the network upgrades identified for CED Wheatland. Do you remember that testimony?
I think what I recall his testimony was that it was too far distant to impact the flows. I don't know that he was talking specifically about the network upgrade solution.
Okay. All right. Let's turn to page 9 of your rebuttal testimony.
Yes,
Let me get there. On page 9 of your rebuttal testimony, you testified that you modeled a reduction in generation at Colstrip units 3 and 4 to keep the system in balance. Is that correct?
that is correct. Yes.
Okay, so based on that testimony, is that reduction in the type of redispatch and remediation you found? Is that reduction the type of redispatch and remediation you found lacking in Northwest Energy's power flow analysis?
No, this reduction again was just because I had increased injections at Wheatland and Judith Gap in order to have the same amount of generation in the power flow model as the load. I reduced the generation at Colstrip. So it was really just so the power flow model would solve. The remediations I'm talking about that are lacking would be, say you found an overload. Is there a way to alleviate that overload by further redispatching generation on the Northwestern system to change the flows, as opposed to concluding that you need to build a new transmission facility? So it's an alternative to, building something physical as a way to alleviate the congestion or the overloads that you're finding.
Does your analysis involve in any way replacing capacity and energy from Colstrip with capacity and energy from Wheatland Point of Interconnection?
That's not the design of it. The design of it, again, is just to keep the power flow in balance. Because again, the way the power flow works is if it's, say if there wasn't a swing bus and you didn't balance it, the power flow would not solve. You would get a mathematical error. So your choice is to make an adjustment to keep it in balance, or to let the swing bus absorb that difference. So the use of the swing bus in the power flow is really just a mathematical concept to allow it to solve if there's a slight mismatch. So given that the swing bus in Northwestern's power flow characterization is Grand Coulee, my decision, and I think the proper way to do it, is to make an adjustment to another generator on the Northwestern system to reflect the change in flow. I would note in the system impact restudy that Northwestern had used when they concluded that this 230 kV line segment was needed. Basically, they did an N-2 or N-1 contingency analysis looking at voltage issues. And in that analysis, they increased generation at Wheatland beyond the 75 megawatts that was requested. And they made offsetting reductions at Colstrip. So I was surprised that this became a controversial issue.
Okay. You recall the testimony yesterday about the independent third-party review. SIS, correct?
Yes,
Are you aware of that?
generally, whereas I talked earlier, I reviewed that report at sort of a high level, yes.
Okay, I'm less interested in the content of the report than I am the process involved with it.
Okay.
Can you provide more detail regarding the circumstances that led to the independent review?
Yes, I believe it was in the Wheatland avoided cost case before the commission that CED and people that were working for CED at the time started to raise some concerns about just really the cost magnitude of the network upgrade proposed at that time, which was, a line from Broadview to Highland, basically to Great Falls. And it was, $200+ million. And so subsequent or maybe parallel with the end of that proceeding, I think, as I understood it, CED retained Rich Lockhart, who was a former colleague of mine in different places, basically, to look at the power flow modeling that had been done in the original system impact study and to critique it. And so Mr. Lockhart had a series of concerns in his view that were wrong with the way that the modeling had been done. And Mr. Lockhart is an electrical engineer. He's been a consultant in the industry a long time and has done a lot of work before FERC, so he's very cognizant of FERC policies. As part of his process, he himself doesn't do power flow modeling. So he had asked me to sort of do some subcontract work for him to basically try to understand what was going on with the power flow modeling that had been done by Northwestern. So we did a series of cases really to test the modeling that they had done. As I understood it, he wrote a report critiquing what they had done and had a series of.
Chairman, I'm going to object to any hearsay of what Mr. Lockhart did and said.
Mr. Udom.
Well, I don't think he's actually testified that Mr. Lockhart said anything. I think he's describing what Mr. Lockhart did. I think it's a fair question to ask Mr. Schiffman how he knows what Mr. Lockhart did, but I don't think the objection would be hearsay.
I agree. I'm gonna overrule, and plus, the commission is interested in the process. So please proceed.
So my understanding is based on the modeling work that I had done with him, based on mostly on his own review of how the study had been done, of how he thought the study should be done. My understanding is he wrote a report that I believe he presented. Well, I know he presented it to CED, and I believe that was presented as well to Northwestern's transmission planning people. And I understood there was, a series of discussions about that. And then somehow this independent entity, or Mr. Angel, got involved with doing kind of an arbitration or dispute resolution. So that's my understanding of the process. And then what I heard after that was there was a restudy done based on the conclusions of that report, and whatever else Northwestern had concluded had changed by then. And then the restudy resulted in the upgrade we're talking about now, which is still a 230 kV line, but much shorter.
Do you know, and if you don't, that's a fine answer, but do you know if the third-party review that we were just discussing was required under any of Northwestern Energy's existing interconnection agreements or policies?
I don't know if it was required or it was an option. I believe there's some tie to it, but I don't know the details of that.
Fair enough. Do you have any idea of how long that third-party review process took?
My general impression is it took a few months, but I really sort of lost touch with that process after I turned over the power flow data, and then, would just hear periodically what was going on with it, but I wasn't really involved in it myself.
Okay. Have you had any do you know if CED was satisfied with the third-party process and how it was conducted?
My understanding is they weren't satisfied with it, but they made the decision they weren't going to further pursue it by filing a complaint at FERC, which, as I understood it, would be their next recourse.
All right, very good. Thank you for that testimony. You were also here when Ms. Mueller testified yesterday, correct?
Yes,
And you had an opportunity to hear that testimony?
I did. Yes.
Okay. I'm maybe presupposing what you heard, but do you agree with Ms. Mueller that the interconnection queue is flexible and subject to change? You recall that testimony?
I think it's accurate. Yes, the projects are coming and going in the interconnection queue. Yes.
Okay. So based on that answer, do you think it is reasonable for CED Wheatland's final allocated cost to be subject to change as the interconnection queue changes?
Could you help me a little bit just to understand when you say changes, in terms of changes with a project that's senior queue position, or any change at all?
The answer both.
I mean, if a senior queue project changed, then it would definitely change, because there's this whole issue of the contingent facilities. Which, as I understand it, say if the project that caused the contingent facilities dropped out of the queue, then it's not known really what upgrade is required for Wheatland anymore. So there'd have to be a restudy. So definitely it would change in that case, because it may be that the 230 kV line is no longer needed. It may be that it's needed and all the other facilities are needed. So there would have to be a restudy. In terms of the allocation of the upgrade that we have before us, I don't think it would be affected by subsequent projects coming into the queue.
So having read through your testimony, this is a question that is still not, the answer to which is still not clear to me. Is it CED's position that the commission should determine the final cost of the CED upgrade? Or in the alternative, would it be enough for us to determine the allocation methodology and leave the final cost to a later study work?
My position would be, it would be reasonable for the commission to determine what I term, I think, the proportionality ratio is. And then, as you're indicating, to the extent that the subsequent study work showed a different number to apply to that ratio, I think that would be reasonable, because I don't think the commission itself has, well, I don't want to testify about law, but I don't know that it's your responsibility to determine what the upgrade costs are and what the solution is.
That does beg the question, I think, that's been banging around in my mind, who does have that responsibility?
I don't really, I don't know that I can answer that question without making a legal opinion, and I don't want to do that.
Well, I just know for the record that we've had all sorts of legal opinions being bandied about, but I appreciate your answer to that, Mr. Shippen. Do you have data response PSC R001A in front of you?
May we approach the witness?
Yes, of course. PSC R001A. (001) small a.
Sorry, Mr. President, the data response I have doesn't have subsections. It just says PSC R001.
Well, let's start there. Did you prepare a response to this data request?
I would say that I collaborated with a response with Mr. Uda's team on this response.
Okay, so do you feel qualified that you can respond to any questions I have to this data response?
Not to the detail. I think this one we basically stated in the response that I'm not an attorney, but then we're trying to be helpful. And so most of the drafting of this was actually not something I did personally.
Who would have done the drafting?
Mr. Colson most likely, or Mr. Chandler probably assisted him.
Okay, well, I'm going to ask you questions about it, and then you can give me the best answer that you can on this. And any limitations that you might have in responding, just note those for the record, if you would, please.
Sounds fair. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Turn now to the second paragraph of the response
Yes.
and the language that says discussing comparing two sets of classes in this case, a QF generator as compared to a non-QF generator or utility-owned generator. Do you see that?
Yes, I do, Mr. President.
Okay, can you just read the response into the record, if you would?
Entire paragraph or just a section?
Starting with the sentence beginning fundamentally.
Says fundamentally, when evaluating whether discrimination is occurring in this context, it is necessary to review treatment of two sets of classes. In this case, the QF generator as compared to a non-QF generator or utility-owned generator, to determine whether the entity making certain decisions over the matter, in this case, Northwestern Transmission, is giving undue preference to one class over the other or disadvantaging one class in preference of another class. Concerning this matter, there are two sets of classes that are similarly situated, i.e., both are energy generators that are seeking to interconnect at the transmission level to Northwestern system that require comparison to determine whether Northwestern Transmission's treatment is discriminatory.
Okay, based on that response to data response PSC R001, is it CED's position that these two classes, i.e. the QF generators and non-QF generators or utility-owned generators, are similarly situated?
In terms of the treatment of transmission costs,
Correct.
our position is they should be similarly situated.
But what I'm asking is I appreciate that response, but what I'm asking is is it CED's position that they are similarly situated?
Our position is that if the CED projects were not given a refund of the network upgrade costs, that they would not be similarly situated.
And we're talking about the QF generators and the non-QF generators, correct?
I think the similar situation would be more akin to the QF generators versus the Northwestern owned generators.
Okay, then turn to page 17 of your direct testimony then.
Yes, I'm there.
All right, thank you. Page 17 of your direct testimony, you state, and I quote, additionally, FERC is currently working through a series of proposed rulemakings in an effort to make cost allocation of network upgrades more conducive to generators, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so based on that response or statement, your testimony also includes a footnote, correct?
It does, yes.
And that footnote cites 2 FERC rulemakings.
Yes.
And do those reference rulemakings address QF generators?
They reference transmission planning and cost allocation and generator interconnection, which I presume encompasses all classes of generators.
Including QF generators?
Yes.
Okay. You also state that if FERC were to make it, and I quote, if FERC were to make it more favorable to generators in the realm of cost allocation as it relates to receiving reimbursement for network upgrades, the gap between what the commission is ordering as it relates to cost allocation and what FERC is doing as it relates to the cost allocation would be further growing apart. And then you go on to say this would lead to even more discriminatory treatment towards QFs in Montana, correct?
Could you just give me a second to review that, Mr. President? Yes, that's correct.
Okay. What is the gap you're referring to in this testimony? Is it the gap between QF generators and non-QF independent generators? Or something else?
I mean, I think in terms of our position in this case is really the gap that we're concerned about is the gap between the QF generators and Northwestern's own generators.
Is that what you were referring to in that testimony?
I was referring to both in this testimony and then in the course of this proceeding, I think our understanding improved about how Northwestern own generation, particularly as an example, the Yellowstone generating facility, basically how its network upgrade costs and transmission costs would be incurred. And so I would say our position has sort of focused in on the treatment between the QF and the owned generation more so than a merchant non-QF generator.
Would you say that position has evolved as this hearing has gone on, or was this your position coming into this hearing?
I think we were always concerned about both, but I would say our position has become more refined and evolved, I suppose would be reasonably accurate. Yes.
Okay, so based on that testimony, focusing on the gap between QF generators and utility-owned generators, why would a gap between QFs and non-QF independent generators matter?
Well, it would still matter to the extent that the non-QF generator is getting a refund under FERC policy and under, the commission's previous order here and under Northwestern's proposed treatment, there would be no refund for QF resources.
All right, I appreciate that testimony. Thank you. Okay, so then based on this line of testimony, it seems to me that Northwestern Energy believes that they are not similarly situated because QFs do not pay an embedded cost of the transmission system. Do you recall that testimony yesterday?
I recall the testimony, yes.
All right. Well, then do you agree that QFs do not pay an embedded cost of the transmission system?
Yes.
Well, based on that answer, then all things being equal, are QFs better off for not paying an embedded cost of the transmission system?
Are they better off relative to if they had to pay it? Are you asking, Mr. President?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so I believe I heard from your earlier testimony that QFs, it is CED's position that QFs should be refunded the full cost of network upgrades, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So then based on that, I'm curious that if your client is refunded the full cost, if you will, in that event, will they still be treated the same as non-QF generators?
They would be treated the same in terms of the interconnection cost treatment. They would not be treated the same in terms of transmission service treatment.
Okay. So in the scenario, say if the commission were to decide to require a full refund of the network upgrade costs initially paid by the QF, which I think is your testimony,
Yes.
right? In such an event, would QFs be better off than all non-QF generators because they would not pay an embedded cost to the transmission system?
They would be better off than non-QF merchant generators, not than non-QF owned generation by the utility.
Okay, I appreciate that answer. Thank you. All right, let's continue on sort of on this line of questioning. So when a non-QF generator interconnects to Northwestern Energy system, is there any kind of proportionality analysis or allocation of responsibility for network upgrades occasioned by that interconnection?
Not in the context that we're talking about proportionality here. I mean, as I understand it, to the extent that, a subsequent project needed to rely upon the same network upgrade there, I believe Northwestern, as Mueller has talked about, Northwestern has a process. I don't think it's a formal process. There'd be a process for potentially sharing those costs subsequent. But, or if you were in a jurisdiction where they were doing cluster studies, there would be a way to allocate those costs, but not beyond those two qualifications.
Are we in a jurisdiction that allows cluster studies?
I think cluster studies are allowed. I think that FERC has indicated certain procedures for how those have to be carried out. And as I understood, I think it was Mr. Cashell's testimony yesterday, they haven't gone through the process to, adjust their procedures to accommodate that.
Okay. Thank you for that answer. It's my understanding that Well, let me ask you this. Do you believe that a non-QF generator's responsibility for network upgrades must also be set on a proportional allocated basis?
Again, I need to distinguish between, well, maybe I don't need to distinguish. I mean, it should be, there should probably be some allocation, as I talked earlier, if it's a shared network resource, or a subsequent Q project, or even a previous one is, sharing the requirement for that upgrade. But beyond that, typically the network upgrade costs are directly assigned, again, to be funded upfront and then refunded when and if the project achieves commercial operation.
When here's what I'm having a hard time understanding this proceeding. So I'm just going to ask you directly. So it seems that, let me just ask you directly, is it discrimination to allocate costs to QFs and non-QF generators? Is that discrimination if those costs are allocated differently? And if so, how so?
Is it discrimination to, let me just clarify, you're asking me if is it discriminatory to allocate network upgrade costs differently to two different classes of generators? Is that what you're asking?
Essentially, yes.
Again, I'll try to stay afoot of registering a legal opinion, but I think that that's difficult. So it would be discriminatory if that were treated differently for, say, a QF generator and the utility owned generator. In terms of the treatment, in terms of how that's handled for a QF generator and say a merchant non-QF generator. I mean, they should be the allocation of the costs. Again, I don't think it's complicated because for the non-QF merchant generator, that's not really something that this commission has purview over, first of all. So that's why it's complicated for me to answer the question. But in general, for something to be non-discriminatory, the cost allocation has to reflect cost causation. But in terms of what's before us, where the QF generator, I think the comparable, competing generator in this state where the commission has taken some, view on treatment of interconnection costs, not sort of direct jurisdiction as I understand it, but mostly as it flows back through, the determination of avoided costs. I think the discriminatory aspect focuses, at least in my mind, on how is the QF generator treated compared to the Northwestern generator. And as I understand, just to sort of bring out really the issue in this case. So Northwestern is building a generator or proposing to build, and we have discovery responses on this. So we have, actual data in the record. The Laurel Generating Facility, for example, has network upgrade costs associated with its system impact study that need to be paid. Northwestern's proposal is that those costs will flow directly to its transmission revenue requirement. So Northwestern, or the generator itself, is not funding the network upgrade costs as an entity. When the resource becomes online, it becomes a network resource. So it has NITS transmission service, just like the QF does. So it doesn't pay transmission service. So what it's proposing in contrast for a QF generator, which also from a transmission service standpoint is going to be a network resource and take NITS service, it won't pay transmission tariff costs. But under Northwestern's proposal, it will pay for the full cost of network upgrades that are determined by Northwestern, and there will be no refund. So those two, that proposed treatment is, in my mind, clearly discriminatory.
Okay, let's focus then on the utility-owned resources. You're obviously familiar with the difference between cost of service rate making and avoided cost rate making, correct?
Yes.
So please explain the difference.
Well, utility cost rate making is basically taking all of the costs that, in this case, Northwestern would incur to reliably operate its system. And then, which is a combination of, many previous decisions and investments, in addition to commodity costs, human resources costs, a whole variety of costs, and basically figuring out what is a reasonable amount of their costs to reflect in retail rates. Avoided cost is more looking at incrementally what costs could Northwestern avoid by, in this case, taking one of the CED project output from one of the CED projects, as opposed to, what its incremental choice is for providing, the same level of electricity.
So QFs are compensated on an avoided cost basis, correct?
That's correct.
And you would agree then that Northwestern Energy is compensated for its own generating resources on a cost of service basis, correct?
Yes,
Is it your testimony that QFs receive preferential treatment as a result of being paid on an avoided cost basis?
preferential treatment, no.
And is it your position that Northwestern receives preferential treatment as a result of being paid on a cost of service basis?
Not preferential treatment, no.
But it is your position that QFs and Northwestern Energy must be paid on the same basis, either avoided cost or cost of service, to avoid discrimination against QFs? That's your testimony?
Could you repeat that? I'm sorry.
Sure. Is it CED's position that QFs and Northwestern must be paid on the same basis, either avoided cost or cost of service basis, to avoid discrimination against QFs?
No.
But you would agree, or at least what I'm hearing from your testimony, is there is a distinction on how QFs and Northwestern are compensated, correct?
Well, there's a distinction for sure.
Okay. Do you believe that that distinction should influence the allocation and recovery of network upgrade costs?
I mean, again, I'm not trying to be difficult. The question has got sort of too many, it's too broad and too many premises in it. So I believe that the determination of the avoided cost that the QF is entitled to under PURPA should be non-discriminatory.
Yeah, I think we understand that position. I'm not sure you're being responsive to my question, but I'll move on. All right, let's move on. If Northwestern were to build and own the same resource CED Wheatland is proposing, would that resource be subjected for review and of the prudency of that resource be subject to review by the Montana Public Service Commission?
As I understand it, at the time that Northwestern proposed to put it into rates, it would be, notwithstanding, I'm not sure what's going on with the pre-approval requirement and then with Northwestern's proposed reliability rider, whether that would be reflected in that as well. But in general, as a general rule, yes, it would be subject to prudency review by the commission.
Okay, in such a scenario, could the commission disallow costs if it determines that those costs were not imprudently incurred?
Yes,
And could the commission consider the citing of the utility-owned resource when deciding whether to allow costs and rates?
it could, yes.
And could the commission disallow costs of network upgrades associated with imprudently picked resources?
I don't know that I can answer that question, Mr. President, just because I'm not sure if the commission has jurisdiction over those network upgrade costs.
Okay, so based on your previous answers, what guarantee does Northwestern Energy have that it will cover network upgrade costs for resources it purchases or builds?
I mean, I don't know that it has a guarantee. My understanding is it has, an expectation as long as its actions are reasonable and prudent. And whether that falls under federal jurisdiction or state jurisdiction, that's what I don't really want to get into.
All right, did you hear your council's opening statement yesterday afternoon?
I did, yes.
Believe your council made an assertion that Northwestern Energy automatically gets to include network upgrades for its own resources and rate base. Is that correct?
He may have made a statement to that effect, yes.
Do you agree with that statement?
I mean, I think technically it's probably an overstatement.
Thank you for that answer. All right, now let's turn to QFs along the same line of questioning I just gave you for the investor-owned utility. Is a QF siting decision the subject of any type of prudency review?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Okay, so it's your testimony that utility-owned resources siting is the subject of a prudency review, correct?
Yes,
And you've just testified that a QS resource siting is not, correct?
again, I don't want to get too far into making a legal opinion, but my understanding is there's not an entity that would do a prudency review on a QF siting decision.
So these two types of projects are not treated the same, correct?
In terms of the answer I just gave, yes.
Is that kind of treatment discrimination then, in your opinion?
Again, my focus on discrimination is the avoided cost and all of the myriad of components that go into it being discriminatory or not. It's not getting to levels of citing and things like that.
Is it your testimony that the recognized distinction should influence the allocation and recovery of network upgrade costs?
I'm sorry, the recognized distinction? I mean, in terms of whether the citing is subject to prudency review?
Correct.
I'm not seeing how that would flow into the process and the rules as I understand them.
I'm not sure that answered my question. Do you recognize there is a distinction, correct, in treatment?
I believe there's a legal distinction in terms of no entity has jurisdiction to do a prudency review on a QF citing decision. That I agree, there's a distinction.
But it's your testimony that you don't understand how that distinction could influence how allocation and recovery of network upgrade costs are assigned?
No.
Okay, is it your position then that CED should only be required to provide security for the proportion of network upgrades allocated to each project?
I believe it should provide security to the amount of cost that's allocated. That seems reasonable, but not more than that.
Okay, based on that answer, if Northwestern Energy begins construction of the network upgrades and CED decides not to proceed with its projects, will the security provided by CED fully reimburse Northwestern? Do you know?
It would reimburse Northwestern based on whatever the security amount is, not beyond that, no.
So there's a scenario where CED security would not cover the costs incurred by Northwestern Energy, correct?
If they proceeded and completed the entire construction, that seems like, yes, it could be conceivable.
Correct. So in that scenario, who would bear the burden of costs not covered by CED security?
On Northwestern's ratepayers would.
Explain to the commission how that's reasonable.
Well, it's reasonable because the commission's determination of the proportionality ratio is recognizing that the facility provides benefits to additional resource to the overall Northwestern system.
But didn't we have some testimony just earlier with you that it's hard to quantify what the benefits are?
Well, the proportionality ratio is basically being determined based on the Supreme Court decision. So that's really the allocation in this process in terms of doing a more refined assessment of what are the benefits. That's not been done.
But it was just your testimony that it would not be unreasonable to have Northwestern Energy's ratepayers cover any costs not covered by CED security because of the benefits of the project, correct? Isn't that what I heard from you?
It is, but again, going back to, say, Laurel, for example, if they started constructing those network upgrades and Laurel project was disallowed or didn't go forward, it'd be the same issue.
I'm not sure that's an apples to apples comparison. The reason that is if Northwest Energy moves forward with the Laurel project and then comes to the commission and we find that the project or costs incurred therein are not prudently incurred, then those costs would not be allocated to Northwestern Energy's ratepayers, correct?
That's a good point. That's potential, yes.
And who would in that scenario bear the cost? In the Laurel scenario I'm talking about, who would bear the cost of that? It'd be Northwest Energy's shareholders, correct?
Yes.
So what risk in the discussion we have do the investors in CED have for assuming any cost?
Well, they would lose the portion of cost that they had been allocated for the network upgrades if they didn't achieve commercial operation.
But nothing beyond that, correct?
Yes.
So we have a scenario where we're shifting risk over to the ratepayers of Northwestern Energy, correct? Or we could face one.
Potentially, sure.
All right, a couple more questions for you, and thank you for your testimony this morning. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Do you know if CED will be obligated to pay any operation and maintenance costs associated with its use of the transmission system?
I don't believe they would, no.
Does the commission have jurisdiction to require CED to pay operation and maintenance costs for the transmission system?
Again, without putting on a lawyer hat, my lay understanding is no, they don't.
Okay, why would that be the case?
Well, I'll revise to the extent that the commission made that determination as part of its avoided cost determination, then I guess that they would have jurisdiction, but not beyond that, not in terms of a direct assignment of transmission O&M costs to CED.
Can you turn to pages 13 and 14 of your rebuttal testimony?
Yes.
So this goes to the jurisdiction question. So on pages 13 and 14 of your rebuttal testimony, you state that you are unsure if the Montana PSC has jurisdiction over system impact studies, correct?
Yes.
Do you know if Northwestern Energy system impact study process is subject to regulatory approval?
My understanding is the system impact study process itself is subject to FERC regulatory approval.
Is there any other process where the Northwestern's SIS would be subject to approval or modified? For example, a mediation or an arbitration?
I guess there's two things you said about the process. I don't believe the arbitration or mediation would address the process. It might, and as in the case of Wheatland, it may address a specific study or how that process is implemented. I don't know that it's necessarily a requirement. As I understood the arbitration, it's basically a way to resolve a dispute. And then the way I understand the process to work is to, any regulatory aspect to it would involve a formal complaint to FERC.
I appreciate that answer. Thank you, Mr. Schiffman, and good discussion. So thank you. Mr. Hamilton, do you have any questions?
Thank you, Mr. President. Just a couple for clarification. We've talked to Mr. Schiffman a lot about power flow analysis. Is my understanding correct that the purpose of a power flow analysis is to identify needed network upgrades as part of a system impact study?
As it pertains to the system impact study, I think, yeah, it's to understand if the system can accommodate the proposed injection without creating, transmission overloads or voltage issues or stability issues. Yes.
Okay. You mentioned that in Northwestern's power flow analysis, the swing bus was at Grand Coulee, right?
Yes.
And just for my own clarification, where's the swing bus in your analysis?
It's the same. I didn't change that part.
So does it matter at all what the swing bus is that's identified?
Well, it matters in terms of if you don't make the balancing adjustment that I made at Colstrip, it matters because that means that the model itself is going to balance it at Grand Coulee. So for example, if you pick Goldstrip as the swing bus and then didn't make the adjustment, you would get the same result.
Okay. Does it matter then which resources are redispatched or remediated when trying to identify the network upgrades for CED Wheatland?
It matters what you redispatch, yes, because that will affect the flows in the power flow.
So based on the failure, I believe you faulted Northwestern for not redispatching Colstrip, right?
My interpretation of their study, and of course it's based on an interpretation, is that they didn't make an adjustment, that the swing bus took that imbalance. I know that Mr. Pankrat's testimony disputes that. So I won't say I faulted them. I'm saying that's my interpretation, is that the adjustment was made by default at Grand Coulee.
So can you summarize for me, just as best you can, what the significance of that difference in redispatching is? Does it change the network upgrades that would be identified for CED Wheatland?
It would change the flows relative to making a balancing adjustment on Northwestern's system. I mean, I'm having trouble with your question. Does it change the network upgrades? We're not really talking about the network upgrade costs. I mean, we're talking here in this particular case, how do the flows create any additional overloads on Northwestern's system? So, and that's being used for really the denominator in this proportionality ratio calculation. So it would change the flow. So in my view, if you're doing the study of how much incremental capacity can this line carry, you should be making the countervailing adjustment on Northwestern system.
All right, I think I understand now. Thank you for that. One more is, I believe that you testified just in response to one of President Brown's questions, that Northwestern is proposing to roll the transmission network upgrades for Yellowstone into the embedded cost for the transmission system. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that one more time?
Yeah, was it your testimony that Northwestern is proposing to roll the network upgrade costs associated with Yellowstone, formerly known as Laurel, into the embedded cost for the transmission system?
That's my understanding, yes.
Okay. Is it your position that Northwestern has other options?
I don't know that they have another option. I mean, in terms of they could propose to include those in the reliability adder or rider, for example, but in terms of them recovering the cost, probably it'll be similar treatment.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. President. That's all.
All right. Recross. Snorcott.
Thank you. Along the lines of what Mr. Hamilton, your agreement that Northwestern for the Yellowstone County Generating Station will roll in the network upgrade cost to the revenue requirement, correct?
Yes.
So does that mean retail customers will pay for the network upgrade costs?
Yes,
And it's your position that CED should not have to pay for the network upgrade costs, correct? Ultimately, fund up front, but then get the money back.
yes.
Going back to the Grand Coulee and the coal strip adjustments that you talked about in order to balance the power flow. Would you agree with me? Well, let me back up. The area we're looking at for Wheatland's the Judith Gap area, correct?
I mean, that's the specific area we're looking at in general, Northwestern system.
Is coal strip units 3 and 4 in that area?
Coal strip 3 and 4 are in, I mean, the line that we're looking at is going from, Wheatland or near Judith Gap to Broadview. Broadview is in, vicinity of coal strip, so it's in that direction.
But is the coal strip generation in the area of the generation?
No,
And I think we both agree that the Grand Coulee generation is not in the area of the Wheatland.
it's not in the area and it's not under Northwestern's control.
So would you agree with me that it doesn't matter what generator is adjusted in order to balance the power flow, as long as it's not in the impacted study area?
I don't agree with that at all. I mean, definitely adjusting the generation at coal strip will impact the study because it's on Northwestern system. I mean, it's not in Wheatland's vicinity, but it's in Broadview's vicinity.
Broadview,
The substation
the
where the line is
substation.
going to.
but this adjustment is simply to balance the power flows, is it not?
It is, but also I think again, this is why I'm surprised that this is controversial, because as I think I responded in a data response, the other reason I could have made adjustments at other Northwestern generators. But I made the adjustment at coal strip because that would have the tendency of reducing injections at coal strip and increasing injections at Wheatland would have the tendency of increasing flows towards Broadview. So I thought it was a conservative assumption to choose coal strip for that choice.
Mr. Schiffman, and President Brown's final questions to you about pages 13 and 14 of your rebuttal testimony related to the jurisdiction. I believe you answered that Northwestern system impact study or interconnection study reports are subject to FERC approval. Was that correct?
FERC jurisdiction, not FERC approval.
FERC jurisdiction. Has FERC decided interconnection issues related to QFs?
Again, I don't want to put on a lawyer hat. My understanding is they've made interconnection decisions. There's been some discussion about QFs, but I don't have a clear understanding of how those two relate.
So you don't really know.
I don't know. I've seen arguments, back and forth about to what extent do they have jurisdiction? To what extent does the state commission have jurisdiction over the QFs? And I don't, that requires an actual legal interpretation.
But have you seen anything from FERC that says they've acted on QF interconnection issues?
I've seen certain sub or citations from orders, but I believe they need to be interpreted before to know what they actually mean.
You've seen citations in FERC orders?
I've seen citations, I believe Northwestern has cited to FERC orders. That's the extent of it. But again, the briefing through these, QF wars.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Mr. Brown? No questions. Thank you. Redirect, Mr. Uda.
I was going to, but I was wondering if I could get a health and safety break.
That's a fair point, Mr. Uda. I'm happy to accommodate that request. Why don't we take a 10-minute break? The time is 10:40. We'll take 11-minute break. Time is 10:44. We will reconvene at 10:55 a.m. This time we will go off the record. Commissioner O'Donnell, you with us?
I'm here, Mr. President.
Very good, Commissioner. Thank you.
You bet.
All right, the time is now 10:56 a.m. I will call this meeting back into order and back on the record. Mr. Uda, I think you were about to do your redirect.
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the opportunity, but I am going to forego that opportunity.
Mr. Uda, you're a champion for us all. All right. Do you have any more witnesses, Mr. Uda?
I do not, Mr. Chairman. CED rests.
Very good. All right, intervener, Montana Consumer Council, this is your time for case in chief. Mr. Brown. Oh, I'm sorry, would you like to be excused? All right, you're temporarily excused. Thank you, Commissioner Fielder. Mr. Brown, do you have any witnesses?
Mr.
Opening
Chairman,
statement.
Mr. Chairman, as indicated in our pre-hearing memo, I do not have any witnesses to call. I don't have any evidentiary case in chief. I think we've had a really thorough hearing on the last day and a half, and I very much appreciate the commission's close attention to this very technical matter. So we'll reserve further arguments to post-hearing briefing at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Okay, it's my understanding the parties agreed to be able to do live rebuttal testimony. Is that correct, parties?
Mr. Chairman, that is correct. And I believe Northwestern would go first if that were the case.
You agree with that, Mr. Uda?
My understanding, and Ms. Norcott can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's supposed to be limited to any new issues that arose during the hearing. At least from my perspective, I didn't really hear anything new.
Ms. Norcott?
I appreciate that, but I would like time to confer with my client to determine whether or not there was anything new and whether or not we need to recall any of our witnesses.
Very good. How much time do you need?
Minutes.
Okay, very good. All right, then the time is now 10:58 a.m. We will go off the record, and why don't we reconvene at 11:10 a.m. Again, time's 10:59, and we'll go off the record. All right, the time is now 11:10 a.m. We will go back on the record. We had left off with Northwestern Energy determining whether it was going to present rebuttal testimony.
Mr. Chairman, first, I appreciate the opportunity to confer with my client after conferring all any witnesses back to the stand.
All right, thank you, Ms. Norcott. Mr. Uda?
I think I previously indicated, Mr. Chairman, that I didn't think there was anything new that warranted rebuttal, so we will not be doing that. I think I've tried the commission's patience enough for the last day and a half.
Mr. Brown, I'm sure you have.
I'll jump on the bandwagon, Mr.
All right.
Chairman.
Very good. Okay. So having plowed through the substantive portion of the hearing, does any party wish to present a brief, and I mean brief, closing statement? Ms. Norcott?
Mr. Chairman, Northwestern will reserve its arguments for post-hearing briefing.
Mr. Uda?
Was my earlier statement that I don't want to try the commission's patience anymore. I think I will forego the opportunity.
And I know, Mr. Brown, you're chomping at the bit, correct?
Will follow the lead of my esteemed colleagues. Thank you.
All right, very good. With the demurral of each of the parties on doing a closing statement. The evidentiary hearing portion of this hearing is closed and the public comment period is again opened. Is there anybody in the room that would like to make public comment at this time? Seeing no takers, anybody online that would like to make public comment? Seeing none. Good. All right, we will now move off the record to do the scheduling conference. Mr. Hamilton, are you handling that for the commission?
Mr. President, yes, I will.
Okay. Commission will be on standby while parties and Mr. Hamilton confer. I believe we're off the record. Are we off the record? We're off the record now. All right, the time is now 11:22 a.m. We are now back on the record. The results of the conference will now be read into the record by Commissioner. Committee, might as well be a commissioner. Commissioner Attorney Lucas Hamilton. It was an order of the PSC and no separate scheduling order will be issued. Mr. Hamilton.
Thank you, Mr. President. The parties have agreed to file simultaneous post-hearing briefs. The first brief will be due on April 28th, 2023, and the response briefs from all parties will be due on June 2nd, 2023, with no further briefing.
All right. Is there any other matters that any party would like to raise at this time? Okay, then for the record, the time is now 11:23 a.m. The date is February 28th, 2023, and time is now 11:23 a.m. and I will adjourn this meeting. Thank you, council.